Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
All right. So oftentimes when I'm looking for stuff to talk about, I'll find things that I'm using personally or things that affect me personally. And so this story really piqued my interest because this was actually something that came out a few weeks ago. And then I read that story and I was kind of a little concerned. And then I found the story that the bug was fixed. So what happened was there was a story that came out a few weeks ago that talked about the Signal encrypted chat, right? So we've talked about Signal on this show before. It's something that I use daily, one of the most secure consumer end-to-end encrypted messaging apps that's out there. And so what happened was, and this is why it kind of piqued my interest, was there was a story that said the FBI was actually able to extract deleted Signal messages from a suspect's iPhone using some forensic tools. And the content of the messages had been displayed in a notification. So when you have your lock screen and the notification comes up and might see a preview or something of that message, that was stored inside the phone's database even after the messages inside the Signal app were deleted. And so in the specific case that exposed this, the messages were able to be recovered from the defendant's phone in connection with an attack on the Prairieland ICE Detention Center facility, and then Signal had been removed from the device, but incoming notifications were preserved in the internal memory. So when a secure message is received, the iPhone generates that notification preview, and under normal circumstances, dismissing that alert should instruct the OS to permanently delete that temporary text from memory. But due to a specific logging error, this deletion process had failed. So notifications that were displayed message content were cached inside the device for up to a month. And crucially, the vulnerability was not in Signal itself, but in Apple's internal notification storage. So, that's kind of part of the issue is that Signal can only really secure what they own, right? This was a problem with Apple's iOS. So I saw this, and again, I use Signal, so I was like, yeah, this is interesting, a vulnerability that shouldn't happen. Something that I also do, which, it depends on your level of risk, is I don't have any previews that show up on my phone. If the phone is unlocked, nothing can be seen from iMessages, Signal, whatever. Only after I've unlocked the phone will it appear in the notification center and I'll be able to see that there was a message. But I think it sounds like even in this case, anytime there's a preview in the notification center, that's cached. And so what did Apple do? They patched the bug. And so on April 22nd, so just a few days ago, there was an update, which I have already updated my iOS to the latest version, 26.4.2. So if you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and, go to your settings and look for the update because it might not have pushed through yet. Same thing with PadOS, which is 26.4.2, and then iOS 18.7.8 for older devices. So Apple described it as a logging issue fixed through improved data redaction. Signal confirmed the patch and ensured all inadvertently preserved notifications will be deleted and no forthcoming notifications will be preserved from deleted applications, and said no action is needed within Signal itself, just install the update. So a couple of just kind of takeaways. Really, this kind of highlights that gap of expectation. Like as a user, if I delete the app and delete the data, I would, think that the OS would manage that. And so there was a gap here, and we don't really know for how long this bug existed, and how many times, attackers were able to possibly get this. But, the sky's not falling, right? It was fixed, it was bugged. And also the FBI had physical access to the device. So in a lot of cases, when we lose physical access to something, it's kind of like security is already lost at that point, right? And so that's something to take into consideration, Signal also already had an option to prevent message content from appearing in notifications at all. So users can go to the Signal settings notification content and set it to name only or no name slash content. That's interesting because I haven't done that, but I might actually go and do that just for kicks. Because anytime I want to read a message, I still always just go into the Signal app itself. So yeah, and the fix addresses the notification database flaw, but it doesn't change how messaging apps store data internally. Users still need to rely on app level encryption and privacy settings. So anytime you have a chat application, make sure you go into the settings and see how the privacies are for that specific app. Your thoughts on this, Adam?
So while you were talking, I just pulled open Signal on my iPhone just to take a look because I was wondering if they were conflating the OS level notification settings where you mentioned, Andy, you can configure do this behavior when the phone is locked, change the behavior if the phone is unlocked, which most iPhones do by default nowadays. Anything with a Face ID iPhone, I should say, blocks most notifications unless the phone is unlocked. Default behavior. But what this does is this is on the Signal side of it. So if you know how all this stuff works, you understand that Apple operates the Apple Push Notification Service or APNS, and your app provider then pushes the notification to APNS, which then pushes it to your devices. Changing this setting on the Signal side prevents the message content from ever being sent to APNS at all, which is something you'd expect from Signal to have that option. I think most other messaging apps do not because their audience tends to be less tinfoil hatty, although in this case, there was a setting and it would have helped had this person leveraged it. You summarized it well, Andy. The sky is not falling. It's unfortunate this happened. I know on this show, you and I have always had a very strong opinion of Apple and their cybersecurity posture, and they do a great job. And in fact, I don't know if you mentioned it. I think grabbing my phone at the moment, they did actually patch iOS 18 as well, which they
They
don't
did.
always do. So noted that even for down level operating system devices, they can still take advantage of this security fix as well. So it's interesting. I think it's a good point that how something behaves from a front end perspective does not necessarily map to how it behaves from a back end perspective. A lot of modern operating systems have a lot of different logging and auditing tasks always running, and those are coded independently from how the UI is drawn and displayed to the user. So don't always assume that the way the UI shows up matches the underlying behavior. So that's a good lesson learned to take forwards. Yeah, it's an interesting event and a good lesson learned. And of course, Signal had a setting that would have helped. And also go patch your iOS and Apple devices.
The problem with the Signal setting, and I went and checked WhatsApp as well, just as a double check as you were talking, Adam, and it does have in notifications where you can check off the preview. But in both of these cases, and I'm sure this is the case with all apps for the most part, is that the default is
Mhm.
to show the preview.
Tyranny of the default.
Right. And so the mass majority of people are not going to go in to notifications and disable preview unless you're like tinfoil hatty like myself. Right. So I didn't even have this set within the app, but I went ahead and disabled it. I'm going to see how the experience is for a while. But
Well, and again, it goes back to Apple has such a good reputation for security. I don't think it was something that ever crossed anyone's mind on. Maybe I don't want this getting handed off to APNS at all. Maybe I don't want this going to the notification system at all. I mean, my thought up until we just had this conversation 20 minutes ago would have been, well, the OS level configuration is perfectly fine. And
mhm,
in this case, it wasn't. And now it is. So it's kind of
right.
one of those things I think we can move on, but it's interesting to note for sure and something to
Yeah.
keep in mind. And ultimately, I think my point around, and you made the point as well, the gap between what shows in the UI versus what happens under the hood are not one and the same.
I think my main takeaway too is, as we're thinking about security, is that tyranny of the default, is
Mhm.
that what you make default, wherever that choice is, that is what the majority of people are going to go with. It's very rare that anyone is going to go beyond, like whatever. So if you say, phone number MFA is my default, well, that's what the majority of people are going to use. If you say, you got to use an authenticator app, that's what the majority of people are going to use. And if you say fish resistant is going to be the default, then that's where everyone's going to have to be. So it's just like insecurity as we look at these things, that default setting is extremely important.
That's a pretty sick segue to our next topic.
Yeah, you like that?
I like that.
So, in other news, the UK National Cybersecurity Center has now fully backed passkeys. They said that consumers' first choice of login should be passkeys. And the key to this is to understand that they said consumers and not just enterprise security. So this is a recommendation for everyday people. The NCSC also no longer recommends passwords unless they're used where passkeys are not yet available on a digital service. And this is really a landmark position from a national government cybersecurity agency. So kudos to the UK National Cybersecurity Center for coming out and say this. What has changed over, let's say, the last 12 months that makes them kind of say this and confident enough to say this is that they've worked closely with the FIDO Alliance and they've observed positive progress across the passkey ecosystem and saw success in the use of passkeys within the NHS, which is, I think, the National Health
Service
system within the UK. And then in other real world large scale deployments have really validated the technology. Previously, the NCSC has outlined challenges around inconsistencies in the passkey ecosystem, which we have also highlighted on our show. There's different flavors of passkeys, confusing terminology, a lack of consensus on when passkeys should be used. Also, like, syncable passkeys weren't available right away, but now they are. And so there's has been multiple kind of barriers for normal people and consumers getting into that, right?
passkeys plus other factors required. There's a lot of sites where, let's say you had legacy 2FA stood up and then they start supporting passkeys. A lot of them will take your passkey and then still hit you up for another validation. Like Amazon will want your one-time passcode on top of it. And it's like, guys, what are we doing here? Like this doesn't make any sense. This is bonkers. And then it doesn't feel any better. It doesn't feel more frictionless. And so it actually feels more friction filled in some ways. It's truly beneficial when it satisfies all factors, which, while it should, it is inherently a multi-factor authentication. But anyhow, that's another inconsistency in implementation where some sites will override your 2FA configuration if you're signing in with a passkey. That's considered sufficient. Our employer, Microsoft, being one of them.
And so now the NCSC has said that progress within the industry have made some of those concerns addressed enough to recommend passkeys to the general public. The NCSC has rolled out its passkey position specifically to consumers with more guidance for businesses expected in the future. But for businesses, the authentication guidance is still to use single sign-on or SSO when possible. But this whole announcement that we're going to have the link to the article in the show notes is specifically for consumers, which is pretty big. Google made passkeys the default sign-in for all users in 2023, and then Apple followed in 2024. Microsoft made passkeys available to all consumer accounts in 2025, and also the default now when you make a new Microsoft account is a passkey. So we talked about the tyranny of default. It's like if you're brand new and you're starting to when you go to Microsoft to make a Xbox account or Outlook or whatever it is, the default experience is a passkey, a passwordless passkey. And so now the NCSC is catching up to a lot of where some of these major platforms are. But again, that governing body carries some official weight to it.
You could say that, yeah. And it's interesting, this is on the consumer side first versus enterprises. And I think in a lot of ways, I can get why they would go that direction. The consumer-facing organizations, especially Google and Apple, have done a very good job implementing it. And in fact, Windows has had passkey support for a long time, but it just recently got updated to where it has very clean integration with password managers to where they can hook in at an operating system level and deliver their passkeys when prompted, which is really nice and very well done. So generally in a consumer experience, I think it's almost there. There's still some inconsistencies and some challenges. And unless you're like 100% in the Apple ecosystem or 100% in the Google system, You're still probably going to need a password manager to overcome it, but it's certainly getting better. And again, it's a chicken and an egg kind of problem where you have to start pushing these defaults and have to start driving people that direction, and then the pain points will get addressed as more and more people use it and point out edge cases and different examples and different challenges they're having. So again, great news. You and I, Andy, have been banging the drum on passwordless and phish resistant MFA forever. And this is yet another step in the right direction. So you love to see it. Thanks, NCSC in the UK. And let's keep the momentum going forward.
I also think that, like you and me, a lot of the people that, work in tech and hang out in tech are a little bit of an anomaly,
Mhm.
especially in my age group too, where like
Yes.
I'm like a, elder millennial slash, zennial. And you're like an elder millennial as well, right?
Correct. Yep.
So we grew up in an era where, no no electronics existed and then transitioned, from dial up to broadband to smartphones and all that. And so I have noticed that there are a lot of people outside of tech, maybe in a different age group, like younger, they don't even have computers. They don't have personal computers. They literally do all of their computing on their phone.
Right.
Um, and so I think if you're in that kind of category where you don't use a computer, like you're not a gamer, you're not in tech, you might have a work laptop, but you literally only use it for work,
Mhm.
right? And you're on your phone. I think in that case, passkeys are really seamless because you might be on an Android and using the Google password manager that integrates well with Android, or you're on Apple and you have the vault there, and you can just store a passkey for a new thing just right there on the phone and keychain. Yep. And so I think if you're in those categories and you're just storing your passkeys in there and you're just doing all your computing on the same device, it works very well and very seamless.
That's a really good point because there's, speaking of like picking on millennials and us going through all the things, there's a lot of memes that talk about how millennials, when they make a big purchase, they have to do it on a
Yes.
big screen. Like
Yes.
if I'm booking a vacation, it's like I got to get my PC out to
I
book
hate
this or
doing
my
it on my
Mac.
phone.
Yeah, I
I
won't do
have
it on
to
my
be,
phone.
yeah, it's
And
true.
other generations are perfectly fine booking a flight on their phone, and it's bizarre to me. Like, no, that's a big screen purchase.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. When you're just naturally switching devices less, and you're all in one ecosystem, it's way easier to already be on board with passkeys.
Okay, so our final topic, and I saw this post and I just wanted to talk about it because, you know, it's another person kind of hammering the point that we've made. And if you're new to the podcast, or, even if you've listened to us a while, you've heard us say this point, but if you're new, this might be the first time you've come across this opinion. And I just wanted to echo it because I follow Marcus Hutchins on LinkedIn. And you might not know that name if you're new to cybersecurity, but Marcus Hutchins has been around for a long time and he carries some weight in the cybersecurity industry. He's known online as Malware Tech. And the reason why he's kind of globally recognized is because one of the things that he did was he single handedly stopped one of the worst cyber attacks the world has ever seen. So, WannaCry, in 2017 was a ransomware attack that just kind of was rippling across uh, the entire world's technical ecosystem. And
That was WannaCry, in case you don't remember it, was the one where Microsoft patched Windows XP because the National Health Service, hello, coming back up again, they were hit particularly hard by this and they had a ton of XP still in their environments. And so at the time, Terry Myerson, who was running Windows, made the decision like, we're patching XP. I know it's out of support. I know we told everyone to get off it, but we're doing the right thing. We're not going to keep you know the entire country of the United Kingdom in the dark ages from a healthcare perspective. This is the right thing to do. We're going to take care of it. So that's how bad it was. It got Microsoft to patch XP years after it went out of support.
yeah, and it was rampant. I mean, it just rippled across the world, right? And so, what Marcus did at the time, he was only 22 years old. He reverse engineered a sample of the malware. And what he found was in the code was a DNS entry, a website, a URL, a domain, so to speak. And so he went and he looked to see if it was registered. It wasn't. And so he just went ahead and registered it. And what happened was that was inherently a kill switch. that was built into the malware. And so once he registered the domain, the malware, beaconed out, saw that the website was registered, and that stopped it. And so that's why he's kind of like an urban legend in the cybersecurity world, because he was able to he was the first person to register that, reverse engineer it, then register the domain, and actually stopped the ransomware attack that was globally affecting everyone.
So pretty impressive resume for a 22-year-old.
Right, right.
Might know a thing or two about malware.
Yeah, and so, he had this post that was on LinkedIn. So if you go and I'll put the post like in the show notes, of course. But what he was saying is all this fascination with Anthropic Mythos, and we had talked about how it found a bunch of like bugs in these old, open source software, and he was saying that for this, it's not necessarily that it's like something that's earth shattering, because no one's really looking for these bugs, because no one's getting paid to look for these bugs. That's the whole problem. Like BSD, which is, a Linux an operating
Unix.
Unix operating
Yeah,
system,
the
right?
Berkeley software distribution.
Mythos was able to find that remote code execution, 17 years old, remote code execution vulnerability, and with no authentication running. And it found another one in OpenBSD, a 27-year-old bug, right? And so um, BSD doesn't have a bug bounty program. So there's no financial incentive for anyone to be looking over the code and to report them. And in fact, if I found the bug, I would make more money selling it to attackers than I would reporting it to BSD. Like
Mhm.
he said, a BSD kernel, a remote code execution RCE, would probably fetch around somewhere 100,000 to 200,000 on the black market. So that's a lot of money to just give up if you found it. And it might not be useless. He said, while most bugs look mostly useless, you never truly know whether a bug is useless or not. Sometimes a seemingly useless bug can be chained with another vulnerability to achieve RCE, remote code execution. So he also said that anyone that found the bug would have been financially incentivized to keep it quiet, and BSD has about 0.1% of the market share. So there's probably not a whole lot of people bothering to even bother to audit the code in the first place. And there's a big difference between a bug going unnoticed and unreported. So what Mythos was able to do was not necessarily something that no one could do. It's just that it performed the work that no one else wanted to do at the cost of, $20,000 worth of tokens or something like that, right? And so it's it's able to do this meaningless work that no one will just go and do on their own, which is the problem with open source software, which Adam will probably go on a rant on. But that's the danger of using open source, especially if you don't know if there's a bug bounty program or no one's looked at it, just because it could be widely used but still have bugs. So it's just, I think, in general, if your SBOM includes open source software, you really need to be on it and careful about where you're using it, especially if it's a critical application for your enterprise.
Andy, I think it was you, maybe it was someone else, who made the point that commonly used components in a software bill of materials will actually start to benefit from being frequently scanned with AI
Hmm.
tooling, and should get really, really hardened as a result of it, provided there's enough volunteer software developers willing to take those pull requests and implement those changes, which is no given thing. And there's potentially, and we'll see if this is FUD or if it's reality, potentially there's could be a lot of those. It could be a lot of work comes, and instead of shipping features, we're playing catch up and doing a lot of patching of 17-year-old vulnerabilities. Could be not fun for a while to be a contributor to an open source project. But I think most widely used components will probably benefit from very thorough and consistent checking across a lot of orgs, kind of redoing the same thing And they'll get really, really hardened. They'll be excellent. So this could, in the long run, be a net positive. But for something like this, OpenBSD, I keep wanting to say FreeBSD. I think that's another distribution.
They found both.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Um, Not as widely used. It's not a Linux derivative, it's a Unix derivative to be specific. I guess we'll see how this plays out and we'll see how much Mythos is never going to ship, by the way. Anthropic has said Mythos is a research preview. These changes will ship in a more consumer focused, but like a shipping focused product, like a Claude Opus release, as an example. And 4.7 was a step in that direction. It is not, the full kind of Mythos implementation. Mythos is also, you made the good point, very, very expensive to run today. So there still gets into a cost element where we are not to the point yet where these are so commoditized and so cheap to run that it is trivial to point it at a large code base like a Unix-based operating system and say, go to town. You still have to have some money to invest to do that. So again, I think it's going to start with a lot of folks researching their bill of materials, and we'll go from there. Ultimately, I think this is a short-term pain, long-term gain thing, because eventually we are seeing kind of Moore's law happen in the AI space where the cost of tokens is decreasing exponentially year over year as the entire stack gets more efficient. You talk about not just the silicon, not just the GPUs, but the CPUs, the interconnects, the networking, the memory, the software stack it's running on top of. All of that is getting more efficient. And you compare where we were 3 years ago, 4 years ago to today, it's like a hockey stick curve in terms of the difference. And so eventually it will get to the point where a really good researcher model is not terribly expensive to run, and we can fire it off at, again, I mean, all the public facing repositories on GitHub. I mean, that's not a crazy thing to dream about. It's not tomorrow, but it's a someday thing. We can effectively put them out of business. Now it's going to go back to, can we implement the code changes? And well, we're also going to have AI. It already can. You can give it a pull request and it can go write code. You still need a human to review it, I think, at this point, but even that's going to lessen with time. So I think the stories of an impending cybersecurity apocalypse are a little overblown because the tools are available on both sides, and the tools can be very powerful in the good guys' hands too,
Mhm.
to write much more secure code, to find more vulnerabilities. You talked about chaining vulnerabilities as well, and that's something these tools are particularly good at finding.
Yep.
When Mythos first got announced, it was noted how clever it was at chaining vulnerabilities and just doing things humans aren't very good at. I am an eternal optimist. I'm almost a toxic optimist at times, but I do think in this case there was no human solution to hardening cyber or to hardening open source software. Tanya
Yep.
Jenka, our very first guest on this show, pointed out there's no cybersecurity fairy running around and doing security evaluations on open source software. Well, guess what? The cybersecurity fairy may have been invented.
Hmm.
It's these tools, and are they economical to run today on every open source tool? Probably not. Can we see a future that's not far off where they are? Absolutely yes. And do we have a future where we can help accelerate writing the code to fix the vulnerabilities? Also, yes. So I think there's a very good possibility the good guys here will be the good guys and gals will be okay. There's going to be a lot of work to do. And it's going to be on a very accelerated timeline where we're going to need to work fast and with a sense of purpose and a sense of urgency. And if you work in corporate America, you are sick of sense of urgency because everything's urgent, everything's now. This will actually be something that has a true sense of urgency and actually does impact the world. This isn't some, oh, we got a fire here and it's, some manager needs a spreadsheet. Like, it's not a real fire. This will actually be that. And that's kind of exciting too. Like, I know a lot of us got into this business to make a difference, and we're going to have a chance to do that in a big, big way in the near future. So I think that's exciting. And that's the bullish view on what lies ahead. But a really good note from Marcus here.
Yeah. I think what you were saying in the beginning was a point that I made when we talked about Mythos the first time was it's being released in this project, right? Where Glasswing, I think it's called, where 40, top organizations have access to it to test it and run it. And Microsoft, our employer, is one of them. So, all of these major companies, so I'm sure Apple and Google also have access to it. And every one of those companies use open source software somewhere. And so I would assume as part of that exercise and testing that they would also run it on at least the open source software that they're using. And so that the more commonly used ones across the board would get it. I just read an article on how Mythos is helping with Mozilla and Firefox. It found something like 270 some bugs in the latest version of Firefox. And so it's something that these vulnerabilities were not identified by fuzzers or human red teamers.
Mhm.
So AI was just able to find 270 some plus bugs, and AI flagged 22 of them as security sensitive. So I do think you're right. Like, this will be a little bit of short-term pain as we're kind of fixing and implementing all of these fixes and patches, but in the long term, this is definitely a plus for security. I just think that in general, a lot of organizations don't have an idea of what open source they're using. And so be very cautious of what you're using, because attackers have access to these tools too.
Mhm.
And they're probably scanning a lot of the common ones as well, finding bugs and using them for their own nefarious purposes.
100%. And you're right. When Microsoft, Apple, and Google all got their hands on this software, job one was run it against the Windows code base, or run it against the Mac OS code base, or run it against Android. Job two was, okay, now run it against everything that we import into those code bases, any third party code we leverage or libraries, and go scan all those. And that has already happened. And by the way, again, just to close it out here, our employer Microsoft did their April monthly patch Tuesday a week or two ago, and it was relatively large, one of the larger ones in a while. And so there was, again, kind of some FUD on, see, they found all these in Mythos and they fixed all these. And it's like, actually, if you go look, April is typically one of the largest patch Tuesdays. That's just very normal. So it's actually very historical and cyclical. And it's actually not abnormal at all for a typical April cycle. Because, by the way, total side note, Windows Hot Patch, you don't need to reboot your Windows systems every month anymore. They can go without reboots every 2 out of 3 months now. So February and March are non-reboot months. If you have Windows Hot Patch enabled, the operating system just patches on the fly and keeps running. No restart required. April is a restart required month. So that also is now a thing we're seeing, where on those months that are restart months, so January, April, July, October, are all larger patches now as a result of it. So, I'm sure, and by the way, Andy and I totally do not have access to Mythos, have not touched it or anything. That is definitely above our pay grade, but it's definitely that is happening. So I think both closed source and open source is benefiting, and we'll see that trickle down effect for sure.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, along with the links to the stories that we used for the show today. So go ahead and click those if you want to read them. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.